Drive on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Katie Perrior, former head of communications at Number 10, is still with me in the studio. We're talking about everything that's been going on over the last couple of days on the campaign trail. Now, Labour have announced a timetable for scrapping tuition fees. They're now saying, as a sort of an amendment to their original policy on tuition fees, that if they win, they will scrap fees from as early as this autumn. This is being interpreted as a further attempt to woo young voters, of course, and today being the last day in which a lot of young voters can register to vote. I would say the time probably isn't a coincidence, but is this a policy that will work? Let's get the thoughts now by Lee Jones, Professor at Queen Mary University, who actually was signatory, along with a number of other academics, to a letter which was published this weekend, calling for tuition fees to be scrapped, and will no doubt welcome this policy. Hello, Lee.
Hello there.
Why do you support this pledge from Jeremy Corbyn to scrap fees as early as autumn?
Well, there are a number of reasons. One is that the fees and loans regime is essentially a graduate tax, but it's only paid for by young graduates, so it's not an equitable way to fund higher education, particularly given the precarious labour market, very high rents and so on being faced by young people. Second reason is that they distort education and student choice. It presents education as being purely about private investment, leads to a very instrumental approach that the government actively encourages, and it distorts students' choices. They're very anxious about debt. Many more of them feel forced to live at home during their degrees and not go to the best universities. And they also devalue the public role of universities. Universities aren't just about training people up for the labour market. They are about educating citizens. They're about serving local communities, the media, policymakers, NGOs, museums, galleries. Public funding is important to recognise and protect those functions. And then finally, we've got this funding system is costing the government a huge amount of money. Something like 23% of the loans given out are not being paid back. And coupled with the marketisation of the higher education sector, they're leading to a financial crisis in many universities. So as we speak, 600 academic posts at various universities around the country are at risk. So it's rather like other parts of the public services that have gone into deep crisis over the last few years, and restoring adequate public financing to universities is really essential for all those reasons.
Lee, I'm joined here by Katie Perrior, former the communications boss at Number 10. Katie, your thoughts on this?
I'd like nothing more than to scrap tuition fees, because I do think that we should be investing in tomorrow's generation, especially in a post-Brexit Britain. But it's simply unaffordable. And, I can write out a lovely long wish list of the things I'd like to see happen, but I know that I don't have the chequebook to pay for it. We have to be realistic. We have to look at the public finances and think, what can we pay for and what can't we pay for? And in fact, the Labour Party itself are rolling back from this. First of all, it was going to be an open pledge. Then it was no, you've still got to pay for it, but we might refund it. Then there's a row going on as to whether or not to even out in terms of inequality, you invest more money in early years, such as nurseries, rather than at the other end, at universities. And so there's real confusion going on. I mean, I'd like to go on a train on the way home from work today and be greeted with a lovely cold glass of wine, but it ain't going to happen. We need to be realistic about what this country can afford and what it can't afford. And as I say, I'd love to be able to get rid of them, but I don't think it's affordable.
Lee, it's not affordable. There is also an argument, of course, that this is scrapping tuition fees altogether. A lot of universities say would actually be detrimental to social mobility, because it would mean that university had to put a cap on the amount of places they could offer, which would mean less people from less fortunate backgrounds could access higher education.
Well, let me address the affordability point. I mean, people often forget, who are using this kind of austerity language, or they try to make you forget, that the UK is the world's fifth largest economy. It's funny that we can never afford public services and education, but we can always afford things like war. So the cost of scrapping tuition fees has been estimated at about £8.5 billion. To replace Trident would cost £205 billion. Somehow we can find money for nuclear submarines that are never going to be used, but we can't find money to invest in the country's future. And it is an investment. It's not simply a cost. If you look at the contribution that universities make to GDP, in 2011 it was £73 billion. 757,000 jobs. So they employ 2.7% of the workforce in this country. They're a massive economic multiplier. So they have a positive. University funding has a positive impact on the economy, as well, importantly, as having a big positive impact on local communities and the lives of students. As for the social mobility point, I don't think that it is the case. If you look at what the government's done recently, which is to uncap student numbers and allow some universities to expand at the expense of others, creating more of a market as universities chase student fees. What that has done is radically destabilised the internal finances of many universities. And importantly, it tends to be those universities that are best at widening participation. So, for example, London Metropolitan University has gone from a huge campus of nearly 30,000 students down to 10,000 students in the last 5 to 10 years. And this university has more black and minority ethnic students on its campus used to than the entire Russell Group put together. So the consequence of all this marketisation and fiddling around with the fees regime over the last 10 years has been really detrimental for those universities that have done most to widen participation in our society.
The taxpayer is not here to fund universities in a way that we are responsible for their success. Surely people vote with their feet. They decide to go to a particular institution because A, they get the grades to get in, and B, they've got the money to be able to go there. And, I agree that actually that second point, I would really wish that wasn't the case. But that's the matter of the fact that we can't afford. You look at countries around the world, not many countries have fully funded, higher education. And we are in a position where we can't necessarily afford it. Plus, young people have also, I think in the last few years, especially under Theresa May, she's trying to put the emphasis on what she calls T skills, which is that technical kind of skill set. Because, when I was one of the first in my family to go to university, but going there, the subject areas we would study, I'd be surrounded by my colleagues and friends who study media studies and, all these kind of things. We actually need people that can build stuff and engineers that can make, manufacture things in Britain that will be sold around the world post-Brexit. So maybe we are, we should be spreading that load and paying attention not just to universities and those tuition fees, but to, other forms of education as well.
Lee?
On the point about affordability in different countries, there are about 30 countries around the world that offer free education, and many of them are on the continent. This is the thing about the Labour manifesto. It is, not only is it popular with the British people, it's mainstream on the continent. These things are regarded as normal. There's a kind of propaganda effort to make people believe that these policies are somehow kind of wildly fantastical and completely unaffordable. Germany recently introduced tuition fees in one area and then scrapped them again. So some countries are going in the other direction. I think we all realise that if we want to move, up the value chain, we want a more skilled workforce, and if you want critical citizens who are able to see through the kind of garbage austerity propaganda they're being fed, then you need a highly educated workforce. It doesn't mean that you can't educate people in technical skills, but we have to remember, of course, that it was the Conservative Party that essentially abolished polytechnics in the early 1990s and made them convert to universities. I think that was a mistake. I think we have neglected technical education. But of course, also the Conservatives have run down industry in the UK so that there's barely any of it left. And you can't just magic industry and industrial jobs into being after 30 years of running them down.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Lee Jones from Queen Mary University. Interesting stuff. If you would like to contribute to this debate, you can tweet your thoughts to me at Talk Radio or at Delaney Man, or give me a call on 0344 499 1000.